How y'all doing? A beautiful day here in Nova Scotia, and I've got to tell you, I am excited because I think that we have a great show lined up. I'm pretty pumped up. We've got a lot of short videos, some older, some newer, but it will kind of get into the soap opera that we watch here every day, like always about the politics, but a little bit less, a little more fun. How about that? How about nothing less? So we can jump right in. Want to say hello to everybody before we get started. Hey, Clint. Hello, Patty. What's going on? We got Bud Wilson in the house. That's always fun. Willem Feather, good day. How are you? Things are great here in Nova Scotia, so we're just going to jump into this first video. And again, it's a little bit dated. We've got a fun show lined up. This one will keep it rolling, I think. Let's get it going. We're ready to go. Here we go.
Yesterday, the Liberal chair of the Heritage Committee was awfully concerned that nobody was regulating the content of the internet. As we speak, there's just a whole lot of internet going on out there with the emails and the Google and the kids twittering. Now, she's worried that, and I quote, anyone can publish anything.
Kirk here.
You know, when Al Gore invented the internet, he did it in a way that protected free speech. We know that the Prime Minister has great admiration for dictatorships like China. Is this government going to take a page from the original Red Book and start stifling free speech?
Hey, Kennedy, what's up? How are you?
The Honourable Minister of Canadian Heritage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
What's up, Speech?
I would like to thank my honourable colleague for his question.
Look how cute she is back then. Oh my goodness.
We understand the importance of technological changes and the culture that is in line with these technological changes, and that is why our government is committed to really look into the opportunity of...
Order. Let's settle down, folks. We want to hear the answer to that question. The Honourable Minister of... I know members are anxious to hear the answer. The Honourable Minister of Canadian Heritage has the floor. Will have order.
Clearly, Mr. Speaker, there's no issue with free speech in this House. Thank you. Thank you. So, we will launch public consultation on the digital shift in order to really seize the opportunity, but not only that, to really understand the impact the internet may have on users and creators in general. Thank you.
Minister, when did you first find out that a PRC diplomat was targeting me and my family?
I've learned it through the news.
Why is this diplomat still here?
So, I knew you would be asking me this question because it's a valid question. And, you know, just to go back a second, I can only imagine the shock, the pain, the worry that you've gone through, dear Michael, due to the targeting of your family and loved ones. And so, as I mentioned earlier, on a personal level, and, you know, as Foreign Minister, I take this extremely seriously. You've asked me questions regarding foreign interference in the past. I've always said that, of course, we would never tolerate any. And second, we would make sure that, you know, if there was any violation of the Vienna Convention, we would take action.
Minister, Article 9 of the Vienna Convention is clear.
I will just, if I can...
I've heard your answer. It's
no, but I'm not finished.
Well, why is this diplomat still here? Article 9 of the Vienna Convention is clear. Article 9 says that the government can declare a diplomat persona non grata for no reason. The article is clear. So why is this diplomat still here? A diplomat who has more rights and immunities than the Canadians around this table to go around and conduct his foreign interference threat activities. He has diplomatic immunity. He cannot be criminally prosecuted. We all remember the case of the Russian diplomat who mowed down a Canadian citizen in a drunk driving case and killed her, and Minister Manley was unable to do anything about it. You have given accreditation to a diplomat here who is using his diplomatic immunity to target not just me and my family, but other members of Parliament. So why do you, Minister, continue to allow this diplomat to be accredited in this country on Canadian soil? That is the question. And you
Okay.
haven't answered the question.
Well, let me be able to answer the question. And of course, Michael, I understand your frustration and I understand your anger. So
We haven't
but
expelled a
Michael,
single
Michael,
PRC diplomat.
Can I just
We are
finish?
one of the only democratic
Mr.
allies in the
Speaker.
NATO alliance that has not expelled
Chair.
a single PRC diplomat. And Canadians are being targeted by the over 100
Mr.
diplomats
Chung,
accredited
will you
here.
allow the
Yes,
minister to
okay, thank you.
respond?
So, first and foremost, what we're doing right now as a government is we're assessing the consequences that will be facing in case of diplomatic expulsion, because there will be consequences. I think it's important the Canadians know what we've learned from the two Michael experience is that, of course, China and the
Hey, Bart,
PRC
what's
will
up?
take
Sorry,
action.
Mr. Wilson.
These interests,
you
including economic interests, consular interests, and also diplomatic interests, will be
Minister, I can't
will
think of
be
any
affected,
interest.
and therefore, no,
Minister,
Michael, I just want to finish my answer because this is very important. It's about you, but it's about also the interest of the country. So, as we are assessing the interest, and I know that we are under pressure to go fast, we need to make sure as well that we protect our democracy. And that is why we will take action in light of the facts
Hey,
that are
Bart,
being
what's up?
presented regarding your case and, you know, any MP that could be targeted. So that's why my deputy minister right now is meeting with the Chinese ambassador and summoning him. And that's why also we're assessing different options, including the expulsion of diplomats, because it is important that we take a decision.
Minister, just with respect to interests, economic and otherwise, I can't think of an interest more important to the Canadian state than the protection and the safety and the security of its own citizens
And I agree with
here
you.
on Canadian soil.
And I
That
agree with
trumps
you.
all other interests.
I agree with
It
you.
is inexplicable that this diplomat hasn't been told to leave the country already. And I would hope that the deputy minister is informing the ambassador that this individual, Mr. Weijo, should be on the first plane out or declared persona non grata. And I think that that is the only course of action here, because if we do not take that course of action, Minister, we are basically putting up a giant billboard for all authoritarian states around the world that says we are open for foreign interference threat activities on Canadian soil, targeting Canadian citizens, and you can conduct these activities with zero consequences. And that's why this individual needs to be sent packing.
So
Mr.
I
Mr. Chair,
hear you,
a question
and
about...
I share your concern regarding
Hey,
foreign interference.
someone-
I share
Sean T,
your
how are
concern
you guys?
regarding the message we would be sending. I think in order for this country to be safe and prosper, of course, democracy must be at, you know, our bedrock. That being said, we will take a decision thoughtfully. We will take a decision that will have the best interests of Canadians and
Mr.
our
Chair,
democracy in mind. But as
like
I
to ask
mentioned,
a
all
question
options are on the table.
about
Thank you.
I'd like to ask a question about the intelligence assessment dated July 20th, 2021. Did your
It's funny
department
to hear him
receive this
say
intelligence assessment?
assessment and be
I was
talking
not
to Mary
the Minister for
Jolie.
Interference.
I understand that, but I'm asking if your department
Ironic.
received it. You were
Yes.
appointed minister on October 26th. Several months later, I assume that your department received it. The Prime Minister indicated yesterday that that assessment never left CSIS. It seems inexplicable that it would not have left CSIS. CSIS doesn't produce intelligence products for its own consumption. It produces them for departments and central agencies.
Well, as you know, the Prime
And I am
Minister
trying
has
to find
asked
out why that
I'm afraid
information never made it out of
Mr.
CSIS.
Chong,
So,
you're considerably
Michael,
over your
the
time
minister
now.
has asked an investigation on this.
So-
You know that. You had many conversations with the Prime Minister himself about this issue. You've been briefed about this
Bring
issue
this-
at least
Mr.
6
Chong,
times.
you're out of time.
So,
I'd just
you've
like to
had
ask
access
Mr.
to that
Chong,
information.
you're a minute
ask-
and 20 seconds over time.
No, I'm not.
It says here 6 minutes and 14 seconds.
Yeah, I'm allocated 6 minutes, rounds.
No, 5 minutes as I indicated at the
Okay,
start.
thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chong.
Bonjour tout le monde. Hi everybody. Good to see you. Mélanie Joly, Foreign Minister from Canada. Mélanie Joly, la ministre des Affaires étrangères du Canada. Ça me fait plaisir de vous voir aujourd'hui. It's a pleasure to be back here at NATO celebrating 75 years of the alliance. Canada, as a founding member, is extremely proud of this year. And also, we're an Arctic nation, and therefore we're extremely happy to see Sweden now being part of NATO. Alors, ça nous fait plaisir d'être ici et de célébrer nos 75 ans en tant qu'alliance. Et nous sommes également très contents de voir que la Suède se joint à l'OTAN. Now, talking about Ukraine, Putin thought that he would divide us. Now we're stronger than ever. We know we have to continue to be united supporting Ukraine. Canada has been supportive of Ukraine since day one. We know also we have to continue to invest in supporting militarily and at all levels Ukraine. That is why we signed recently a long-term security agreement with Ukraine. Tomorrow we'll be also talking about the Indo-Pacific. Lots of our Indo-Pacific friends and partners will be here. Canada, as a Pacific nation, will continue to commit a lot of our resources to the Indo-Pacific. Right now, after the US, we are the NATO partners that have the most frigates in the region. We need to invest in the Indo-Pacific to make sure that we keep things steady in the region. Donc, ça me fait plaisir de répondre à vos questions. Essentiellement, lorsque vient la question de l'Ukraine, le Canada, on a été là dès le début, dès le jour 1. Nous avons investi massivement au niveau militaire, mais également à plusieurs autres niveaux avec l'Ukraine. Alors, nous allons continuer d'être. When it comes to Ukraine, I'm convinced that the U.S. will find a way to continue to support Ukraine. It is important to remember that Russia is supported by China when it comes to Ukraine, and that is why we need to address these threats together.
Do you think it's realistic that NATO agrees on a 100 billion fund for the next 5 years for Ukraine as proposed by the Secretary General of NATO?
Well, of course, we're always there to support the different ideas that are presented by the Secretary General. We've already also committed a long-term security arrangement to Ukraine. Prime Minister Trudeau was there recently, a month ago, and it was one of the ideas that Canada put to the table at the G7 to make sure that Ukraine would be in a strong negotiating position one day when the war is over and Russia will still be a very dangerous neighbor. So we wanted to make sure that Ukraine could have access to these security assurances, these guarantees, until becoming a member of NATO. And that's why we continue to welcome any form of support that Ukraine can have, because we need to send a message to Ukrainians themselves, but we also need to send a message to Russia.
On Middle East, a couple of weeks ago, there are tourist activity, especially in Iraq. So Canada, one of the members of the ally against Daesh, ISIS. Are you concerned about that activity, tourist activity in Iraq?
Well, first and foremost, as you mentioned, yes, indeed, we're part of the NATO coalition that is anti-Daesh in Iraq. I was recently in the region and also met with our forces that are based out of Kuwait. We believe that when it comes to the Middle East, we are concerned of escalation. That is why the violence must stop. We need to make sure also that we work with different partners on keeping the region much more stable. We've called for a ceasefire back in December. We've also been clear when it comes to the Middle East that the hostages must be released, and at the same time humanitarian aid needs to go into Gaza. So unfortunately, a Canadian was killed in the IDF strike that targeted humanitarian workers from World Kitchen. My deepest condolences to their loved ones and family members. We call for a full investigation. We want to make sure that Israel looks directly into this issue. I've reached out last night to Israel Katz, my Israeli counterpart on this very issue. Israel needs to respect international humanitarian law, and we will make sure that that is the case. Thank you.
Who do we have next?
We're
Oh,
bombarded with
here.
information nonstop.
Okay, so again, we're trying to make the soap opera interesting. What we have here is Sophie Trudeau and her new book, and she's just out speaking. I think that everybody's interested in Trudeau's soon-to-be ex-wife. So let's take a look at that. I hope you guys find this fun.
And we're not
meant
that
to be.
thirsty for more and more information, but we're thirsty for wise knowledge and silence and rest.
In her new book titled Closer Together, Knowing Ourselves, Loving Each Other, Sophie Trudeau gets personal, inviting readers on her journey towards self-knowledge and empowerment by drawing on the expertise of mental health professionals and leaders. The self-help guide and memoir touches on Trudeau's struggles as a child, career woman, and mother. A launch was held in Montreal on Monday, and the book is available on April 24th.
Mental health is the #1 cause of absenteeism at work. So this is a real crisis that we're facing. I've been trying to share this information for more than 20 years, and unfortunately it took a pandemic for people to realize that without nourishing human connection, we don't feel well.
Keeping the focus off her relationship with Prime Minister Trudeau, Grégoire Trudeau hopes her first book will help to spread mental health research as well as the knowledge she's gained in the field over her 2 decades of advocacy work.
I want to share it with everybody so it could benefit as many people as possible. And you know, when we think about mental health, it's the fabric of our lives. It's not just the absence of mental illness. It's how we sleep, what we bring our attention to, how we treat ourselves when nobody's looking, how we eat, what we eat, and what we put our attention to. I really want people to be able to have more tools, which I explain in the book and which I share in the book, to be able to regulate their own selves, you know, and start developing more emotional leadership.
Grégoire Trudeau also revisits her struggles with panic attacks and eating disorders with an approach that feels warm and safe.
The biggest gift in all of this is when people come up and share their personal struggles with me. That is, it's a sacred gift. We're all one trauma away from each other. It takes one traumatic life event to change your brain, the way you perceive yourself. Through human connection, we can heal. And we're called to do, I would say, an individual step towards emotional leadership, but a collective step as well.
In Montreal, Anastasia Dextrine, City News.
Prime Minister, are you embarrassed by your behavior today? Not an edifying day for the Prime Minister, or an institution that has seen some decidedly unparliamentary moments before. Justin Trudeau's father famously mouthed a 4-letter expletive.
And when you say fuddle-duddle or something like that.
Part of a long history of trash-talking across the Commons aisle.
Just quieten down, baby.
I'm not his baby, and I'm nobody's baby.
A Liberal MP calling a Reform MP
more than a slab of bacon talking there.
I lost my temper.
Justin Trudeau 4 years ago showing he's not shy about salty language. And earlier this month, he was accused of an insulting gesture.
He certainly went too far, Mr. Speaker, when I saw him stick his tongue out.
Physical confrontations between MPs, far more rare.
Do you have the fortitude or the gonads to stand up and come across here and say that to me, you son of a bitch? Come on.
We sometimes see this happening in other legislatures in other countries. And I've always thought when I see those scenes, gosh, you know, it's never happened in Canada.
Just yesterday, when debate in South Africa's parliament descended into a brawl. Scenes more familiar in Taiwan or South Korea or Ukraine.
The chamber is extraordinarily small. People don't understand how close these members are, and I don't think they understand how quickly emotions can get exaggerated, how heated people can get.
In these close quarters, the rarely seen former Prime Minister Stephen Harper looking on and appearing to find it all a bit amusing.
Justin Trudeau's youth and style has attracted media attention from around the world. This incident today, though, is already making very different kinds of headlines on the BBC, in France's Le Monde, and even the South China Morning Post, Lisa.
All right, Glenn, it is definitely one for the books. Thanks for this tonight on Parliament Hill.
All right, let's bring in Lydia Miljan, political commentator. She's a poli-sci professor at the University of Windsor. And I want to get to the budget, but let's talk about that intriguing story in the Globe and Mail by Lawrence Martin, who's their political affairs columnist, saying that he's hearing Dominic LeBlanc is mulling over.
I'm probably a little bit slow at this adjustment to doing a bunch of videos on the fly. So now this is the introduction to how Trudeau is just not selling to Canadians anymore. Here's a political expert to give her take on that. Let's.
For the idea of taking over for Trudeau if and when Trudeau leaves. Your thoughts?
Yes, the plot thickens. I think it's quite telling that we're getting all sorts of little leaks from different factions within the Liberal Party about potential successors to Justin Trudeau. And let's face it, I think that this is Justin Trudeau's last stand. I think they put a lot of effort into their pre-budget sort of roadshow, trying to really sell the idea that, you know, with the goodies that they were going to give Canadians, and they really had a real run up to this budget day. But let's face it, if those poll numbers don't change for him, and in some cases if they go worse, there's going to be increasing pressure on him to resign. And so then the question becomes, who will succeed him? And so Dominic LeBlanc probably doesn't want that story out this soon, because it doesn't usually go well for the people who do the backstabbing. You want to sort of be quietly in the wings waiting for the opportunity to seize. You don't want to be front and center before the Prime Minister's had a chance to make the decision himself.
Oh, what a tangled web we weave. Well said. So, okay, let's just pursue this a little bit if we can. We do want to get to the budget, but, you know, your thoughts on, honestly, whether Trudeau stays to fight that election or not?
He keeps on saying that he's going to remain. I don't see it happening. I think that there is going to be a lot of pressure on him to go down. You know, when you look at all the polls, I was actually just watching Nanos's report this week, you know, showing that Justin Trudeau is really trailing behind significantly Poilievre. And, you know, he is the face of the Liberal Party. And to his credit, you know, he brought the party from third place in 2015 to win a majority government, and then 2 successive minority governments. You know, so the question he has to ask himself is that does he want to end on his own terms in a winning so-called winning streak, or does he want to go down in flames, which seems to be the case in 15 months from now. And I don't think that he'd probably want to have that legacy of somebody who took it from the really the remnants of ashes to bring it back up, only to destroy it under his watch. He's probably much more likely to want, at least if the Liberals are going to go down, he'll probably want them to go down under a leader other than himself, sort of like Brian Mulroney did, right? They knew they were going to lose that 93 election. He just didn't want to be the person doing it. And so obviously it fell to Kim Campbell, and she did a spectacular job of losing.
I remember that election too. Okay, although I was very young. I think that was the first election I ever voted in. Let me ask you this.
For toddlers.
Yeah, there we go. Let me ask you this as well. You know, the polling you referenced, it does show a little bit of hope for the Liberals. I mean, they are doing a little bit better than they were a couple of months ago. You know, do you think their strategy, Lydia, is the following? Look, you know, the Conservatives have peaked early. Hopefully, you know, a lot can happen in 15 months. You know, you never know. And why don't we just hang around and, you know, hey, maybe the fortunes will change.
Well, yeah, we can do a lot of wishful thinking. But, you know, let's face it, the numbers that have changed for them are at the margins only. They really, you know, it's within the margin of error. And there's lots of competing polls that suggest that the numbers for the Conservatives are remaining solid. They have a long way to go down. I just don't see that happening. And you know, this budget really seemed to be grasping at straws for them. I mean, they really are throwing everything at the wall, and they're getting panned. I mean, they're getting panned by all sorts of different people, both on the left and on the right. And in particular, their gambit is to try to woo that 18 to 30-year-old demographic, to try to bring young people in. Their slogans all about, you know, fairness for a generation. But, you know, critics are quickly pointing out that when you increase taxes, when you increase your debt and deficit, you're having an intergenerational burden on those same people. And so I doubt that it's going to help them in the long run. I mean, we're going to have to see next week's poll numbers. But again, if those numbers aren't budging significantly, or if they remain the same, it seems that they're going to have to figure out a different tact. And since they've just put out this budget, they're kind of now hammered in by the policies they put in there, and that we're not going to see any major change until maybe the fall economic statement at the earliest, or perhaps the next budget next year, which I think would just be far too late for them to make any inroads on, you know, new voters.
One of the other names that's often brought up is Mark Carney, former governor of the Bank of Canada, former governor of the Bank of England. I can almost hear the attack ads by the Conservatives, Lydia, already. This guy's a globalist. He's an internationalist. You know, he's just just visiting, similar to what they did with Michael Ignatieff way back in the day. We'll see how that plays out if he even jumps in. Whenever that happens, a lot of ifs there, but he too criticizing the budget. Your thoughts on whether this is really going to make much of a difference. They're targeting certain demographics. They know they need to win whenever there's another election. Will it be enough? Will people say, oh, actually that could help me buy a house for the first time, or I like the idea of dental care or pharmacare, and that's going to be enough for me to stay with the Liberals?
Yeah, people love free stuff and they love lower prices, but they also are pragmatic, and they're seeing that the things that the Liberals are offering aren't necessarily helping that many people. I mean, the dental care, you have to be, I think, very old to get that dental care, and it's very confusing on how you're going to do it. And the other thing is, I didn't even consult with the dentist, so there's a lot of uncertainty there. And yes, of course, everybody wants affordable housing, but I don't know if we're convinced that the measures that the Liberals have put in place are really going to make that much of a difference. We know that inflation's out of control, and we know that the debt costs of this government are more. We're paying more in our debt than we are for healthcare. That is a terrible headline for any government. And as much as they want to micro target, when that's put to people and they're reminded of that, they are probably less likely to want to stick with the Liberals, and are probably desperate for any new ideas, even if they're unpalatable. Ideologically, they're probably saying enough is enough with this government. They really have run out of steam.
Yeah, and it's pretty shocking, and you mentioned that a moment ago, the idea that we are now paying more on servicing debt than we are for healthcare in this country, and I think it's, to the tune of, something like $54 billion or something, just paying off.
All right, gang, so what we're going to try next is a different story, and
than healthcare.
Going to drop into that right here. I think this is a little more interesting. Probably. We'll see.
Should an MP have to resign their seat before crossing the floor or joining another party?
We'll see.
I think it would be a good idea to have them, resign at first, but I don't know enough of the details to give a really honest answer.
Yeah, I think they should have to resign because you're voted in, the people who voted for you voted with these beliefs, and now that you switched beliefs, they voted you in with these intentions, and now you're going to go the other way, and they didn't have a say in that anymore, and that's undemocratic. If you're confident, you should be able to win it again in what you believe in.
I would think that it would make sense that they resign. If they're, basically they're going to say, well, I'm no longer with you guys, my philosophy is now with those guys. They should have to basically resign and be accepted on the other side, yeah?
I believe they should, because they should let them know the reason why they're joining the other party.
I don't think so. I haven't really thought about it much, but I think they were elected, and I think that they can stay there certainly and wait out their term. I don't think they need to resign.
How are you?
Well, I think they should resign their seat. The voters voted them in as a particular party, and for them to take a personal choice and just change over and take that support with them, I think is unfair.
No, I think you elect the person to the position, and they make their decisions. And if they want to change, fair enough. Wait till the next election and then vote them out. Don't waste money on another election.
Well, that's a good question. I think they should resign their seat. If they were elected by the people to be in there, like for myself, I vote for the person. I don't vote for the party. So if they have a good platform, that's who I usually vote for. So if, for example, back in our day, we had Dale Kirby was the member for my area, and he switched over from the NDP to the Liberal Party, and I wasn't for the same platform that the Liberal Party was offering at the time, and I think he should have resigned, but he didn't at the time.
Yes, they should resign their seat. They're going to a different party altogether, so their philosophy is better for the other side. For them, they want to go, well, resign your seat and go across the floor.
Yeah, I haven't given that one much thought, but I think that's probably the sort of thing to do with integrity. Yeah, resign it first before crossing the floor. It's my first thought on it. I haven't really given it much thought, but
I'd say yes. They were elected in that seat by people voting for the party. I understand some people vote for the actual MP, but for the most part, I believe people vote for the party, not the MP. So, I would say so.
I think that they've worked together. They've been elected or appointed depending on the position, and they've earned that. And crossing the floor, I don't think that's such a big deal.
That, I think, is a matter of the constituents to make that decision. I leave it to them. I think if a person feels that the promise made by the party has shifted so far to the opposite of what the person represents and the constituent represent, then that person should have an obligation of trying to represent the constituents and their positions more freely. So I think too long they're tight and gripped as MPs, and either they speak and represent the constituents or they represent the party. Either one, they got to make a choice.
It would make sense, right? Because if they're changing parties, it makes sense that they're changing their policies from what they were elected for.
Personally, I feel that they should resign their seat and be voted again by their constituency under whichever new party they're going to.
At the end of the day, they were elected by their constituents, and I think MPs need to do whatever they can do to represent the voice of their constituents. Right now, they tend to be tied to parties, but I don't know that that's the best solution. So crossing the floor gives people options.
I think they should, because they get elected as one party to represent a certain set of beliefs, and if they want to change parties, I mean, they need to have their constituents have a say in an election to make sure that that's the party and that's the philosophies that they want to go with.
Everywhere I go, all across the country, Canadians tell me they want change, real change. And I've been listening. When you look out at the economy these days, it just doesn't feel very fair. With inflation, with high housing costs, with so much uncertainty.
Canadians, grocery bills suck. Rent sucks. Mortgage renegotiation, oh my God, how are we going to deal with it? Like, these are real fears.
It's time for a real change. Liberals have the plan to make that happen. We hope you can join us.
Here we go.
On the carbon tax in particular, the Prime Minister has tried to bait me at times with certain ad hominems and name calling almost. But look, we have a very different opinion on the carbon tax. It's not right for the people of the province right now. I wish the Prime Minister would understand that. He's being very sclerotic in his approach on this ideologic marriage that he has to this principle. That's not to say that we don't believe in fighting climate change. We certainly do, but this policy is wrong.
Newfoundland and Labrador Liberal Premier Andrew Furey there speaking to local media following his party's loss in a by-election this week. Furey isn't mincing words, as you heard, conceding his federal cousins, and the price on carbon certainly didn't help his party's prospects. Is that a sign of things to come in Atlantic Canada and perhaps elsewhere? Let's bring back the front bench: David Hurley, Gary Marr, Brian Topp, and Marika Walsh. Marika, does it matter that the lone provincial Liberal Premier is speaking about the Prime Minister and his marquee climate policy this way?
I think it matters. I think it matters both because the Liberals want to finally get away from talking about the carbon tax, which they've been really struggling to get away from for the last few months. And I think it matters because it shows how isolated the Liberals are across the country right now. But Andrew Furey, he's sort of like he's not the canary in the coal mine. He's like the last canary. You know, on the East Coast, the Liberals have been wiped out provincially. In Nova Scotia, you saw the same lines that the carbon tax last summer was hurting them in provincial by-elections. But I'll also note that in Newfoundland, they've had a Liberal government for almost exactly the same time as we've had a Liberal government federally. So there's probably also just general election cycle voter fatigue also going on there.
How significant do you think Premier Furey's comments are, Brian?
Well, let me put it this way. I think they're hard to admire. If Premier Furey feels that the people of Newfoundland need immediate help from fuel price costs, then they should do what Wab Kinew did in Manitoba, and he should cut provincial taxes, which, unlike the carbon tax, are not rebated. And if he's taking a position in principle that he doesn't think carbon taxes are a good idea, then he's got some options. He can bring in a provincial cap and trade program, or he can join other provinces in a cap and trade program, or you can bring in equivalent regulations and do a deal with the federal government, cut an equivalency agreement, and get rid of carbon pricing in Newfoundland. What you can't do is just play straight politics and say carbon pricing is a bad thing, and simultaneously say that you would take you take climate change seriously, because that doesn't add up. It doesn't add up to just play populist politics with carbon pricing, propose no alternative, and say you believe in acting on climate change, particularly when your province is petroleum.
Good to see you. What's up?
So we can't have it both ways. And I think there's he was understandably upset at losing an incumbent seat. Premiers don't like that. We can understand his emotion, but tomorrow when he wakes up and has his cup of coffee, hopefully he'll talk about the issue more seriously.
My guess is the reason that he got sort of employed the vocabulary that he did and the way that he said it, Gary, is because he has been very specifically sort of criticized by the Prime Minister for his viewpoint, because the Prime Minister is naturally getting a lot of questions about how a Liberal colleague is espousing the views and is against that he's against the carbon tax. The Prime Minister, for example, has called him short-sighted, a short-term thinker. Basically, any politician against the carbon tax is a short-term thinker. He said that he was bowing to political pressure. This is kind of the first time that Premier Furey is fighting back. And to Brian's point, he may not have sort of the policy strength behind him, but he does have a lot of political ammunition. There are lots of premiers who feel like it's a winner right now to fight against the federal carbon tax.
You know, I looked up the amount of money that's collected by provinces and the federal government in carbon taxes in this country, and it depends on a lot of assumptions and there's a lot of nuance, but it's about $8 billion. The only country in the world that collects more than that is France, which is about 68 million people, and they collect about $9 billion. If you take Canada and France together, they make up about half of the carbon taxes that are collected among the top 15 countries in the world. And so I think that, you know, Mr. Furey, he is of the same view as Premier Moe is from Saskatchewan, Premier Smith from Alberta, Premier Ford from Ontario. I don't think that Premier Furey is wrong about the kind of impact that the carbon tax is having on ordinary Canadians, the ability to fill up the tank, to take your kids to school. There are many people who don't have the luxury of being able to buy an EV, don't have the ability to go out and have alternatives for using fuel. And I had predicted some months ago that when the carve out of the home heating fuel had been made, it was my prediction that was going to be the end of the carbon tax, and it may yet turn out to be correct.
David, what are your thoughts on that? I think there is a valid debate over the merits of whether the pricing, I know that there's so much different back and forth about who is impacted by it. Is it affordable? Is it not? Is it raising the cost of living? But ultimately, the politics of it very much feels as though people have arrived at a consensus that it does impact their level of affordability, regardless of the debate about the merits of that point.
This is a tremendous victory on the part of Pierre Poilievre to have completely reframed this debate, to have put this issue in such prominence, and to have made it the standard bearer for unaffordability and for people's unhappiness about their standard of living. But that has happened. And there are no defenders left outside the government of this policy. And in fact, people in the environmental movement are cutting it loose in anticipation of a different government that they'll have to come to different arrangements with. Premier Furey is expressing frustration about what is inevitable in Canadian politics. It's an axiom that when you're in office federally for any length of time, your provincial parties suffer and suffer badly. So when Mr. Mulroney took over in 1984, there was not a single Liberal provincial government in Canada. And 6 months later, the 42-year-old Ontario PC dynasty was toppled by the Liberal Party because now Mr. Mulroney was in power. And so over the course of Mr. Trudeau's time here, we've seen all the provincial governments fall, all the Liberal provincial governments fall, BC, Ontario, Quebec, New Brunswick, Nova Scotia. I mean, Furey's a very smart guy. He can see what's coming. And I know that he doesn't appreciate I know that he doesn't appreciate the way that the Prime Minister talked about him and talked about putting political motivations ahead of the interests of his own people. It's pretty sanctimonious. I mean, the carbon tax, the consumer carbon tax is not the only way to go about this. So I think that Mr. Fury can tell that Mr. Trudeau is going to lose, and he doesn't want Mr. Trudeau to drag him down with him. He's trying to cut as much distance between them as he can, and I would be doing exactly the same thing.
It's a slow
All right,
burn
I have to leave it on that note. I'm out of time tonight. I appreciate all of you making the time for this great discussion. Thank you so much to our front bench this evening. David Hurley, Gary Marr, Brian Topp, and Marika Walsh.
The carbon tax was inserted by Justin Trudeau, not by my supporters. Why did he do that? No, but I'm just curious. Can you explain to me why there is a carbon tax in the agreement?
No, but the question is why.
No, I asked you a question. You keep asking about the agreement.
We're the journalists. Democracy. We ask the question.
I have the freedom to ask questions if I want to, and I've just answered. I've been answering your questions all
right,
week.
Here's another one.
So no.
The government's introducing
why would they
an
do a
investment
carbon
tax
tax?
credit.
You're not changing the subject. I know you want to change the
No,
subject.
I want to ask
because
a
you don't want to
question.
talk
I want to
about
ask a
Trudeau's
question.
carbon tax.
I want to ask a question because in a democracy we ask the question and you answer.
And I decide the answer I give. And the
Yes, you do.
answer is this: we will axe the tax, and Trudeau can try to divide Canadians by putting a carbon tax in a free trade agreement that we already had for years. It won't change a thing.
It's misleading.
Because I will axe the tax, and I will axe the tax with delight and with passion and with incredible speed. So when I'm Prime Minister, you will be shocked at the speed with which I will axe the tax. And the Canadian people will be able to look up at the gas stations and see the prices coming down. And Trudeau can try to distract from his hated carbon tax by putting it in a free trade amendment to a pre-existing agreement. It won't stop me because I will axe the tax, I will axe the tax, and I will axe the tax. Thank you.
But not an industrial emission pricing system.
So Pierre just runs away, but oh no, oh my goodness, guys, what is happening here? We have it under control. The next video.
Hey everyone, Michelle Frere here, Member of Parliament for Peterborough Kawartha. We're at Hawes Acres now. Brian Hawes, incredible guy.
Sorry, gang. So this is an interesting piece that I found, and it's not the best clip of a video, but Michelle Frere is a serious MP in the Conservative Party, and she has a conversation with a real person, a person like the people that I want to be watching my channel, and so I want to watch that.
I mean, what are you generating, Brian, in terms of you do grain, crop? You got a pretty big operation here.
Well, it's small in the big scale.
He's humble. He feeds people.
We grow wheat and corn and beans. We do a lot of edible beans.
Okay.
Instead of just crushing.
Family farm, been in the
family farm. Well, my grandfather came over from Germany in 1930. That's when it started.
So just the other day. So the reason we're here, we're talking about Bill C-234 and the impact it's going to have. This is what the Conservatives are calling on. So Bill C-234 is asking, demanding that the Liberals pass this bill in its original form to remove the carbon tax on farmers, in particular grain farmers. Because what you see here, so the corn's going to come in here, it's wet, then it's going to come over into this dryer, and the dryer has to use fuel to dry it. So it's going to use propane.
Takes energy, so propane. We don't have natural gas, or we would use it if we had it here. But it's irrelevant. It's the same.
So there's carbon tax on this.
Tremendous amount, yeah.
Okay, and so I was looking at some of the stats you were giving me here. This was wild.
As of April 1st, the carbon tax went up is up to $80 a ton. So that would have put it in the last 2 years, probably put 60% on our drying cost.
Okay, so this is wild. So for the people watching at home, how does that impact them buying food at the grocery store?
It's incredible because it's not just like that's one spot where we get nailed with carbon tax. So when you bring your wheat in, for example, and you dry the wheat, boom, carbon tax. And then when we truck the wheat to the elevator, carbon tax. And then when the elevator trucks it to the mill, there's another carbon tax to make the flour. And then when it goes to make the bread, there's another carbon tax. And the freaking loaf of bread has to have wrapped in something. There's carbon tax on that. Then it has to get to the warehouse, another carbon tax on the fuel, for example, and on until it gets to your grocery store shelf, which is put a loaf of bread up by, I forget how many percent it's gone up in the last.
75% is one of the readings I heard in 2022.
Incredible. Like that's an incredible number.
It's wild when people are trying to just feed their families.
Yeah, and everything we do has carbon tax on it. No different than anybody else. Like every time you move, I mean, this hat has carbon tax on it. I don't know how many times. Like everything has carbon tax.
And then there's a tax on the carbon tax.
Well, sure. Then you pay the HST on the carbon tax. It's phenomenal. It's ass. Oh, it's
You can say it. You can say it. It's fine. But I think, so that's why we're demanding this. And I guess what I would say to everybody is, so Bill C-234 has to be passed in its original form in the budget that's coming up. That's why we're doing this video. We're challenging you to message every MP you know, every farmer you know, get them to reach out to their local media. I still think there's a disconnect. People don't actually understand how significant this is on their day-to-day life.
I really believe that people don't grasp the gravity of this carbon tax on your exactly right day-to-day life. It affects absolutely every facet of your life. Everything you own, everything you buy, everything you do is carbon taxed, compounded on top of more tax.
I don't even know that you can quantify the exact
I don't know
number.
how you could.
I actually don't think you can.
And it's really bad because we're trying to compete, of course, with every other country that doesn't have a carbon tax. Their products come in. I mean, sadly, we buy a lot of our parts out of the U.S. At least we only pay a bit of carbon tax on freight.
So you're actually really deterring supporting local.
Well, it's awful. Yeah, I mean, it deters local. You try as best you can, but at the end of the day, we're down to the wire. I mean, we got to survive.
So the last thing I would ask you to talk to is, because farmers to me are the biggest stewards of the land.
Absolutely.
They're the most concerned with the environment. They're the most concerned with stewardship.
Well, because if we screw this up, we are out of business. So you're going to do it right. It's the most efficient. Like there's 48,000 farmers in Ontario alone.
Yes.
I think it's about 836,000 workers that are employed by just
in Ontario.
Just in Ontario. And yes, I mean, people say, oh, well, you do this, you waste that. I waste nothing. We do exactly what we have to. We fertilize. We've got better practices, so we'll do minimum or no till if we can. We make sure our nitrogen is injected right into the ground beside the seed, so that it doesn't leach out. And then we'll double apply it so you don't get any leaching. Like we do it as efficiently as we possibly can because we have to. We are stewards of the land. We are environmentally friendly as we possibly can be to survive.
I think I really challenge you, especially if you live in the urban centers of Canada and you may have never visited a farm. There's a lot of people, we take it for granted because we live in farm world, and we're very fortunate.
Yep.
But there's a ton of people out there that still don't know how this actually your food gets from the farm to the table. And this carbon tax is directly impacting your ability to feed your family. So please, again, I request you to write to your MP, write to your local media, tell them, say we want Bill C-234 passed in its original form. And
Perfect.
Brian, thank you so much for feeding us.
Thank you,
my
Michelle.
friend. Thank you. Thanks.
Appreciate the work you do.
Thanks.
All right, gang. So the next piece is
Justin Trudeau is not.
And well, first we've got to see. This one's gonna. This is just probably better, guys, to do it this way than the other way. Here we go.
Worth the cost. He's doubled rents, mortgage payments, and down payments. His reckless deficits have driven interest rates sky high. Food banks received a record 2 million visits just in a single month last year, with 1 million additional people expected to this year alone. Life is worse for Canadians, but Trudeau is spending more than ever before. This year, Canadians are on the hook for $46.5 billion in interest payments on Trudeau's debt. This is more than the federal government is spending on healthcare transfers to the provinces. That means Justin Trudeau will send more of your hard-earned tax dollars to bankers, bondholders, and his Bay Street buddies than what goes to doctors, nurses, and hospitals. But Trudeau hasn't stopped spending. As a result, the Bank of Canada went on the most aggressive interest rate hike campaign in Canadian history. Struggling families can't afford higher taxes and more inflationary spending that drives up the cost of everything and keeps interest rates higher for longer. Ahead of this year's federal budget, common sense conservatives have 3 demands to fix the budget. Number 1, axe the tax on farmers and food by immediately passing Bill C-234 in its original form. Number 2, build the homes, not bureaucracy, by requiring cities permit 15% more home building each year as a condition for receiving federal infrastructure money. And number 3, cap the spending with a dollar-for-dollar rule to bring down interest rates and inflation. The government must find $1 in savings for every new dollar of spending. We will not support the budget unless it axes the tax, builds the homes, and caps the spending.
All right, well, that's the word from Helen. Sorry, the mic is probably super loud.
Continuing today with our coverage of this week's federal budget, the opposition Conservatives are describing it as, quote, wasteful and inflationary.
Now, he's adding $40 billion of new debt and new spending. That's $2,400 of new inflation. That is why Conservatives will vote against this wasteful inflationary budget that is like a pyromaniac spraying gas on the inflationary fire that he lit.
The Bloc Québécois and the Greens have also pledged to vote against the budget. The NDP, meanwhile, say the Liberals failed to tackle corporate greed, but have yet to decide whether they'll support it.
We're concerned about the fact that the Liberals ignored the opportunity to take on corporate greed. We know the major driver that is driving up the cost of living is corporate greed.
Here to talk more about the budget, our Deputy Conservative Leader, Melissa Lantsman, and NDP finance critic, Don Davies. Hi to both of you. Thank you very much for making the time for this. I appreciate it. Ms. Lantsman, I'll start with you. Would a Conservative government reverse the capital gains tax changes that the Liberals have brought in with this budget?
Well, let's get back to how we started. We have the Prime Minister who said 8 years ago, 9 budgets ago, that the rich would pay their fair share. And we know what has happened is that that's not the case. It isn't Justin Trudeau and people like him who have a trust fund who can shelter away those taxes. It isn't the billionaires that he vacations with on islands that move their money to other jurisdictions that have paid this. It's everyday Canadians, welders, plumbers, single mothers, seniors that have paid for all of the spending and all of the taxes that Justin Trudeau has imposed on Canadians.
So I don't understand if that's not really an answer to the question about whether a Conservative government would change that policy in particular, which does apply actually to corporate trusts.
Actually, we're going to continue to focus on axing the tax and building the homes and fixing the budget and stopping the crime. That's what we're talking about with Canadians. And I'm sure that when we have a platform, you will be the first to know, and we might even announce it on your show.
Well, I look forward to that very much. But I think like in this instance, I'm just asking for your policy position on something very specific that, and I'll be totally transparent, the Liberals are using to try and wedge against you, right? They're trying to say that your party, as a consequence of not coming out in support of this measure, is not prepared to make wealthy people in this country pay their fair share. You can dispel that very easily by saying we would keep it or we would reverse it, but you're not.
We're going to fight a Prime Minister who hasn't made anybody pay, or had the rich guy pay for his promises. He's had everyday Canadians pay for every single one of his inflationary budgets that he's brought forward. And when we do have a platform, you will be the first to know.
So it's fair to say you don't have a position on that tax change.
Well, we're going to continue to fight the fight that we have been fighting for everyday Canadians who are paying far too much, paying more for gas, for groceries, for home heating. They can't afford to live, and that's why we are going to vote against this budget.
Mr. Davies, Ms. Lantsman has expressed what the Conservatives have said so far. They're not going to support this budget. The Bloc will not support this budget. Will the NDP?
Well, we're still analyzing the budget. It's 416 pages long. There's a lot in there. You know, where I would start, Bashia, is by saying that right now I think the dominant, fact that should be concerning Parliament is that people are really struggling in this country. Millions of people are struggling with high prices for rent, can't buy food. People, the idea of home ownership is illusory for almost anybody under the age of 35. People are really hurting. And so what the NDP did is we used our seats in the House of Commons to try to get concrete measures in this budget that will help people. And I think we did that. So I'll just give you 3 quick examples. Pharmacare is in this budget, $1.5 billion to get it started. That'll help 9 million people of child-bearing age in this country, millions of people suffering by diabetes, who sometimes are thousands of dollars out of pocket every year. Second, the first ever National School Nutrition Program, which not only helps kids stay healthy and learn better, but also helps their families who are struggling with the high price of food. And finally, there's extensive commitments in there for housing. To keep affordable housing that we have, to build more affordable housing that people can afford, to help renters. So these are core.
So does that mean you support the budget?
Well, we're still analyzing, like I said, because there's things in the budget that we don't like. And we're taking the time not only to fully digest it, but also to consult with people because we think that's important.
I understand the utility of a lot of what you just laid out, but to Ms. Lanceman's point, we have the Bank of Canada governor warning that excessive spending at the federal and provincial level could work against the monetary policy he's pursuing. In layman's terms, that means he could take longer to cut rates because of the level of spending. The NDP have pushed the Liberals, by implementing these programs at this juncture to spend more money. Why aren't you more worried about how much that will impact the cost of living for everyday Canadians?
Well, we are. First of all, supplying more housing is anti-inflationary.
Not in the short term, with due respect.
It's anti-inflationary. Every major economist we've consulted has said that. When you put more supply of housing in the market, it has a dampening effect on prices. There's excessive demand right now. When you put more supply out, it will reduce prices. Second of all, we have been calling for more revenue measures. So interestingly about the capital gains tax, the inclusion rate under Brian Mulroney, the Conservatives, was 75%. It dropped to 50%, and this budget puts it to 67%. So it's not even as high as it was under the Conservatives in the 1980s. But we've also called for things like a one-time excess profits tax on the oil and gas industry, who made $63 billion, highest in history in 2022.
How do you know that those extra taxes wouldn't be passed on to consumers, again further exacerbating the cost of living issues for them?
Well, you can make that argument about all taxes. By that argument, you'd have no taxes on corporations because some of it can be flowed through, it's true, but a lot of it is not. And I think that if we put a 15% tax on profits over $1 billion on the financial sector in 2022, why wouldn't we do that to the oil and gas sector, whose profits dwarf what was made by the financial sector then?
Because the royalties made off of that sector contribute hugely to the federal coffers.
Well, it's a question of, oil and gas companies benefit enormously from public investment. The roads that the public pays for, the schools that educate their workers, all of the infrastructure that allows them to build and make profits. So we're just asking them to pay their fair share towards the infrastructure that provides the ability for them to make their profits. I don't think that's too much to ask.
Ms. Lanceman, when you talk about the level of spending, we're looking at $53 billion over 6 years, 39 if you take into account anticipated, not yet realized, but anticipated savings. What would the Conservatives not spend that money on? Would it not be creating housing supply, not launching a national food program for kids or lunch program for kids, or not spending on defense?
Look, I think you're asking hypothetical questions. There is no food program. There is no pharmacare program. There is no dental care program. There's 8 dentists in all of Nova Scotia who have signed up for this program. None of these programs actually exist to help people. And it's for the NDP to get up in the House every single day and scream at the Prime Minister about why the cost of living is so high, why he's created this problem, and then enthusiastically support every single measure that continues to make the lives of every Canadian harder. I don't get it. I don't think their voters get it. I don't think Canadians get it. But I do think they're protecting their leader's pension, and I do think that they are protecting the Prime Minister from having the carbon tax election that we want.
I understand the point you're making, and we can ask Mr. Davies about that. I can ask Mr. Davies about that in a second. But my question is not hypothetical, because what they have baked into their spending plan is rolling out these programs, and some of them, like the Canada Child Benefit, like daycare, for example, are already in existence through agreements with the provinces. I think Canadians are really unclear at this point about, if you think spending is too high, what wouldn't you spend on? Other than the infrastructure bank, other than the Arrive Can app, none of that gets you to a place where you eliminate the deficit, which you've pledged to do.
Well, we'll cut the $21 billion in consultants. We'll cut all of the waste.
So you're never going to hire a single consultant as a Conservative government, because you did a lot of that under the Harper government.
$21 billion in outside consultants when our public service has grown and our services are actually worse off is something that I think Canadians expect a responsible government to look at. We have debt servicing costs, meaning the interest that we pay on the debt, that are now higher than what we spend on healthcare in every single province. We think that's unacceptable, and I think most Canadians do too.
I'm not debating whether or not that's acceptable or not. I think you're right. A lot of Canadians feel unsettled by the idea, especially of debt servicing costs exceeding healthcare transfers because of the state of healthcare across this country. But they are interested in knowing how you get to a point where that isn't the case. And your party has so far refused to identify, for example, even of the new money announced in this budget, what you wouldn't spend.
No, look, we're going to cut taxes for Canadians. We're going to make sure that our productivity is higher, that we're developing our resources to grow our economy. And you will see that plan in a platform in the next election. And if we can have that carbon tax election ahead of the time where Mr. Davies and his party are protecting the Prime Minister, we'll go for it.
So until then, nobody will know anything about what you plan to do?
I think we've been very clear with Canadians.
I know you get rid of the carbon tax.
We're going to get rid of the carbon tax. We're also going to build homes. We're going to fix the budget, and we're going to stop the crime.
Okay, building homes costs money. But anyway, Mr. Davies, I want to pick up on a point that Ms. Lansman made, and that is around your party criticizing where you feel the government has fallen short. I believe at one point I've even heard Mr. Singh say that Mr. Trudeau has been a failure as Prime Minister, and yet the reason he remains Prime Minister is because of your party's support. How can you reconcile that for people watching right now?
Because we do something that is rare in politics. We keep our word. We signed a confidence and supply agreement that said that in exchange for us supporting the government, we extracted 27 different demands from this government. This was not a shared agenda. This is not things that we agree on with Liberals. These were things that we forced them to do. Now, the big ticket items like dental care and pharmacare, by definition, took some time to develop. And Ms. Lansman, with great respect, is totally wrong. They are real. There's 1.7.
But those dentists are not signing up. With great respect, I asked Minister Holland multiple times. There's hardly any.
There's no requirement to sign up now. That requirement has lifted. You watch, dentists will sign up by the droves in May.
You're confident in this government to execute on that program
100%.
based on their record?
100%. 1.7 million Canadians have already signed up. You're going to see people go to the dentist in May. We're enrolling 500,000 Canadians per month, and we'll do so every month through the rest of this year. We started last December. In pharmacare, Ms. Lansman knows there's legislation in the House right now. It'll be passed by June, and I'm already told that there are provinces chomping at the bit to sign an agreement with the federal government. Why wouldn't you? The federal government is going to give 100% of the money to any premier who agrees to provide diabetes class medication devices and contraceptives for free through their public health care system. As long as the province agree to do that. Of course they're going to do that. These programs are real.
Again, I recognize the utility in the programs, but with respect, Mr. Davies, you at the same time look Canadians in the eye as a party and say the country is so much worse off. You can't buy a home. You can't afford the cost of living right now because of the leadership of the Liberal government. Is it worth it to keep them in power to get pharmacare, a little bit of pharmacare and dental care?
Yeah, I think it's important for us to complete the agreement that we made. We said we'd support this agreement till June 2025, this government, pardon me. And we still have, dental care still has to be fully entrenched. Pharmacare, the legislation is not passed. So we want to
support the budget.
We want to carry through with those. You know, it's something that we're still evaluating.
But you have to, because you just said you'll keep your word on the agreement, which goes until June.
Well, there's also room to keep extracting things. You know, Jack Layton used to tell us a good opposition doesn't just oppose, it proposes. And with great respect as well, slogans and generalities and evading questions are not, I don't think, responsible at this time. The Liberals have said what they would do in their budget. The NDP has proposed what we would do. And the Conservatives are being evasive about that.
But you also won't say whether you're supported or not, while at the same time saying you're going to keep up your end of the bargain to keep them in power until next year.
Well, we'll have that decision in a couple of weeks. I don't think you're going to hear the Conservatives reveal their position to Canadians in the next couple of weeks either. They're telling you that they're going to do it next election. And that's because I think they're afraid of what Canadians will do when they know what Conservatives will really do. Cut dental care, cut child care, cut support for renters. They will not proceed with the school nutrition program. They will cut and take away those benefits from Canadians, and they don't want Canadians to know that.
Do you want to respond to that? I have to go. But
well, look, Mr. Davies, you continue to pretend to oppose this government. While all of the NDP people who brought you here, you are serving your master to protect your leader's pension, and I think Canadians know that. Regardless, you are going to support this budget, and you might as well tell Canadians that here.
Does he have a point, though, that you're not presenting any alternative?
Well, we're going to present an alternative in the election, and we'll be happy for you to vote non-confidence in this government like you were sent here to do.
We're serving Canadians.
I'm going to leave it there. I appreciate you both making the time, as always. Thank you so much to Don Davies and Melissa Lansman.
All right, guys.
Oh, we have this story.
So, the next piece.
Hi there. Will the NDP support?
The next piece. This is one I made this morning. And then after that, we are going to do a question period from days gone by. I think it's an interesting look. the question period we're going to look at is from 2019 when COVID was like full impact, or pardon me, we're going to be looking at a very interesting question period. But first, we've got this little piece I made this morning, so we're going to drop into it.
Hi there. Will the NDP support the federal budget, yes or no?
We've not made that decision yet.
When I'm Prime Minister, I will keep my promises. Now, another promise, let me try again.
Wait a minute, just calm down. Everybody take a deep breath. The honourable member for Burnaby South, from the top, please.
Absolutely. For the folks over here, when I'm Prime Minister, I will keep my promises. Absolutely.
Hey gang, what's up? Just Ehren right here, Question Period Canada. How y'all doing? Another lovely day in Nova Scotia. Jagmeet Singh there comes off like quite the joke, saying he's going to be the next Prime Minister. I doubt that guy gets elected to Parliament again. He is doing very poorly in the polls, and Canadians are tired of it. It seems like he's dangling a carrot in front of Canadians, which would be an election. He has the power to follow this government on the budget alone. But he's asked directly here by a reporter, yes or no, are you going to vote for the Liberal budget? He doesn't give a direct answer, which is what he does all the time now. No wonder Canadians can no longer trust Jagmeet Singh. I cannot, at least. I used to cheer for the guy, hope for him. Now, it's different. So we're going to watch this scrum that he has, because a couple of these reporters really do stick it to him. That's interesting. And again, Jagmeet just comes up with very shallow answers, really doesn't give any answer at all. Let's take a peek at Jagmeet right here in this scrum, and then we have a treat after that, just an old piece to take a peek at. Let's go, Jagmeet Singh right here.
Amazing, thank you. And Linda was being very modest. Linda is also someone who's very healthy, has been healthy throughout her entire life, eats well, exercises, mentioned that she does yoga as well, goes for walks, and despite that, of course, has an illness that is something that you can't control. Type 1 diabetes is something that comes on sometimes in your 30s, sometimes in your 20s, in Linda's case, in her 20s, and you have to live with it for the rest of your life. So our message is for someone like Linda to have to have spent so much money out of pocket over a lifetime, over $100,000 out of pocket. Linda spends $3,000 a year now, even in retirement, on a fixed income. I think that's wrong. I think someone who's worked their entire life like Linda has contributed so much, shouldn't be spending thousands of dollars out of pocket for medication just to stay alive. I think that's wrong. I think that should be covered. And that's why Benita and I, the New Democratic team, fought to make sure that everyone in our country, including Linda, has free diabetes medication and devices. And as Linda pointed out, the devices are so essential. What is offensive to me is for someone like Linda and the thousands and thousands of people like Linda who need this medication to stay alive, who are on fixed incomes and are having a hard time figuring out how to afford it and spending money out of pocket to stay alive. Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives want to take that coverage away from Linda and people like Linda. Pierre Poilievre has already put in place a motion to stop pharmacare before it even begins. He wants to take that away from Linda and from the millions of people that live with diabetes. He wants to take that away from them. And our message is no. We're going to fight back. We're going to make sure Linda gets free medication for her diabetes and devices. And we're going to make sure that everyone in our country that needs it gets that medication and those devices. We know that this is actually a story of the upcoming election, that the Conservatives and Pierre Poilievre want to take away from families. They want to take away not just Medicare. They want to take away the free dental care we fought for. They want to take away the school food program for kids.
Hi, Steve.
They want to take away the things that people need. They want to cut and gut the services that families need. That is wrong. That is not a choice that's going to make life better for working people. And people have told me when it comes to Justin Trudeau and the Liberals, they are feeling fed up and frustrated. Things have gotten worse, and they don't see that this government can respond to those concerns. They don't believe that Justin Trudeau is going to be able to respond to the concerns they have. They've had enough of him. And so the change that people have The choice that people have for change is between the Pierre Poilievre's Conservatives who want to cut the things that you need, make life harder for working people, or New Democrats, my team, who want to make sure we invest in people. We make sure Linda has free diabetes medication and devices. We invest in people, we lift people up, and we take on the real challenges that people are faced with. That's the choice that we have in this upcoming election. New Democrats who want to fight for you, take on corporate greed to bring down the cost of living, invest in you and your families with pharmacare, with dental care, with child care, making sure people can afford to have a good life in our country. That's a choice that people have in this next election. And so our message to Pierre Poilievre is, we're going to fight back and make sure that Linda gets her medication covered. We're going to make sure that everyone in our country gets that medication covered that they need. We're going to make sure we build a better country together. I'll do that again in French, and then I look forward to your questions.
Hi there. Will the NDP support the federal budget, yes or no?
Good. The questions are good.
We've not made that decision yet, and we've raised a number of concerns. We've said that there's things that we fought for that are in the budget that are good for people, that'll help reduce costs, things like the protection fund for renters, the school food nutrition program, pharmacare, which is going to lower the cost for families. So those are things that are very positive that we fought for, that will lower costs. But we raised concerns, and with Benita beside me, one of the concerns we both raised is the fact that the disability benefit is only $200 a month, far too low. So we've got to hear from the Prime Minister and the Liberals on what their response is to our concerns before we make a decision.
As you mentioned, the government has brought in measures that the NDP has asked for, including in this budget, yet you're not committing to vote in favor of it at this point. You keep threatening to pull your support for the government, but then you continue to support it. So at this point, is this an empty threat?
Well, we said very clearly that unlike the Conservatives who just decided the way they're voting before looking at it, that we would look very clearly at the budget, we would reflect on it with our team, and we've raised some concerns. We've not heard yet a response to our concerns, and so we'll wait to hear that response before we give you a decision. But we're approaching this in a serious manner. We take what we fought for very seriously. These are very important things. Our concerns are also very serious. We want to hear a response before we make our decision.
We will now go to Mickey with the Canadian Press. Please go ahead.
Will an NDP government keep the Liberals' carbon price plan to $170 per ton by 2030?
Well, what we said is on the carbon price, our position hasn't changed. We believe there's a price on pollution that should be there.
Will you keep it then? Will you keep that a carbon price plan to $170 per ton by 2030?
Well, so far what we said is that our position hasn't changed, but we are saying that the Liberals' plan is unfair, and there's elements of that plan that are very unfair. And I've outlined one specific element which I think is glaring in how unfair it is. The Liberals think it's okay to give billions of dollars to oil and gas companies to subsidize them, particularly when they're highly profitable. They're making record profits. Why does that make any sense to continue to give them billions of dollars and then say to working people, we don't have any money for you to support you in trying to put in place a thermal pump or a heat pump in your home? That's unfair. And that type of approach is something that Canadians look at and say, well, that doesn't really feel like we're all fighting this climate crisis together. You're choosing big oil and gas over us. And so what we've said, our plan that we will put forward is one that is fair for working people, takes on the big polluters, and lowers our emissions.
So gang, what's the deal? Can we trust Jagmeet Singh, or is he chasing a pension, fancy Rolexes, BMWs, all these ludicrous things that he didn't used to represent, but now he seems very comfortable? So here's a mistake I made yesterday, that I let one of my videos wind down at the end, and so people thought the show was over, which learning as we go. But we do have one more piece, and this is I think pretty interesting. This is question period from February 18th, 2021, like right before it, well, in the middle of it. Like they're all adapting to COVID and doing remote. It's an interesting question period. Let's take a peek. Let's get into that, because it's an interesting
Oral
look.
questions. Question orale. The honourable member for Carleton.
Mr. Speaker, the Independent Federation of Businesses today published a report saying that 1 out of 6 small businesses felt or we're considering permanent closure. Now we're talking about 20% of jobs in the private sector. We've already lost more than 800,000 jobs. Unemployment rate is 1/3 higher than the average in the G7. The government promised 1 million jobs. When? When will these workers get their paycheck? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, I want to thank my honourable colleague for the question because it gives me the opportunity to share good news with Canadians. This week, the International Monetary Fund published its annual report to assess Canada. The report revealed that the strong and decisive actions of Canada have allowed essential support to our economy and allowed our financial markets to function, as well as protected lives and means of subsistence for Canadians. These aren't my words, they're the words of the International Monetary Fund. The honourable member for Carleton.
Update their talking points over there instead of just reading a selective quote from some starchy report. The reality is this. Here are the numbers. Across the G7, the unemployment rate averages 6%. In the US, it's 6.3%. In the EU, it's 7.5%. In Canada, 9.4%. We are far worse than all the other countries who are also facing the COVID crisis. Isn't it clear that while those economies are suffering under COVID, our economy has the added problem of suffering under the policies of this government?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, let me be clear about the success of our government's policies in supporting Canadian workers and Canadian jobs. As of January, Canada had recovered 71% of the jobs lost since the beginning of the pandemic, and that compares to only 56% recovered in the US. And Mr. Speaker, Canada has a 64.9% labor force participation rate. That's higher than Germany at 56%, the US at 61.7%, higher than Japan, higher than South Korea. We are doing well, Mr. Speaker, in tough times.
The honourable member for Carleton.
That answer just demonstrates how out of touch this government is. The policies were working. We wouldn't have 834,100 Canadians more out of work than were a year ago. If it were working, then we wouldn't have an unemployment rate that's 50% higher than the average of the G7 and of the United States of America. The reality is that this government is delivering among the worst jobs records on planet Earth, and Canadians are starting to wonder how they're going to put food on the table or roof overhead. When will those people who've lost their jobs get their paychecks back?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians know the debates in this House are inevitably partisan. And that's why I know that Canadians will be really pleased to learn that the International Monetary Fund, the premier international financial authority, this week published a report with a very positive verdict on our government's policies so far. The IMF said that our government's strong and decisive actions provided crucial support to the economy and helped protect lives and livelihoods. And they predict our GDP will grow by 4.4% this year.
The honourable member for Arlebos-Haute-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, for months, we've been clearly saying that the Liberal government has failed colossally in protecting Canadians. In addition to the COVID-19 related mortality rate, which now has exceeded 20,000 deaths, we've seen our economy shut down and no end to the end of this collective lockup. The decisions to sign a deal with the Communist Party of China is a disaster. Once again, why did they make a deal with the Communist Party of China? The Deputy Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, with regard to vaccines, let me be clear. Canada received 10 doses of vaccines per Canadian. And we have the most diversified and exhaustive portfolio in the world.
Throw rocks in a glass house. But
we have received 1.5 million doses, and we will receive 400,000 more doses this week alone. The Honourable Member for Arlebo-Haute-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, I can also be clear with the Minister. Getting 6 million doses by the end of March means 8% of Canadians, or 3 million Canadians, will be vaccinated by the end of March. We're at 54th. Well, then we'll be lower still at the end of March. My question is simple. Does the Prime Minister have a backup plan because the Plan A is a failure? The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, from the beginning, the government understood that it was important to have an A, B, C, D plan. And that is why we have the most exhaustive and diversified vaccine portfolio in the world. We did not decide to risk being dependent on one single vaccine alone. Health Canada has already approved Pfizer and Moderna vaccines, and Health Canada is looking at AstraZeneca, Johnson & Johnson, and other vaccines. The Honourable Member for Abitibi-Témiscamingue. I think we're in Plan D and not far from failure. This morning in committee, the Working Group on Vaccine Vigilance confirmed that it did not recommend the government take part in the CanSino vaccine project with China. The Working Group said that it didn't have the scientific evidence to recommend the project. The government still decided to go against the opinion of the experts and to put all its eggs in the basket of CanSino. We lost time, and Canada wasn't able to develop a new strategy to produce vaccines locally. Why did the government not listen to the experts? Who made the decision? The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, at the beginning of the crisis, our government always followed the advice of experts, researchers, doctors. That's our policy, and it's an essential one during a pandemic. When it comes to vaccines, we purchased the most exhaustive and diversified portfolio of vaccines in the world. At the same time, we have focused on domestic production. The Honourable Member for Abitibi-Témiscamingue. Mr. Speaker, I would invite the Deputy Prime Minister to listen what the Industry Committee heard this morning, and she would realize that the reality isn't the same. The Secretary of the expert group, Mr. Scott Douglas, said that science did not allow them to recommend CanSino. The government is hard to follow. It refused to give $2 million to test the vaccine project by Dr. Codinger at University of Laval, supposedly under the recommendation of experts, but it put $56 million in a Chinese project against the recommendation of the group of experts. This proves they are political decisions because it listens to silence only when it suits it. Who made the decision to go forward with China? Who stopped the Quebec vaccine? The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, our government invested and will continue to invest in vaccines made in Canada and in national biomanufacturing. Dr. Codinger received a $1 million subsidy from the federal government for his research when it comes to the funding for coronavirus research. We always invest in promising vaccines here in Canada and Quebec. The Honourable Member for Burnaby South.
Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The NDP fought for the implementation of a paid federal sick leave program, but when the Liberal government introduced the program, they missed the boat. It's not a flexible plan. It's not accessible. The amount isn't sufficient to help families. There are too many delays with payments. So, can the Prime Minister commit to improving this program to protect workers and stop the spread of COVID-19? The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we developed sick leave benefits for workers, no matter where they may live or work,
Hey, Janet,
will not
what's up?
have to
How are
pick
you?
between going to work sick and putting food on the table. This is an important program. It's part of our commitment to ensure the safe startup
Hey, Red
and
Rose, what's up?
provide 10 paid sick days. The provinces have put in place also protections for employment. I encourage all eligible Canadian workers who need this support to apply.
Burnaby South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. New Democrats fought to bring in a paid sick leave program at the federal level. But when the Liberals introduced the program, it had a number of problems. It's not flexible enough. It's not accessible enough. The amount is not enough to support families. And we're finding that the delays in receiving the payment are just too long. So there's an opportunity here. Experts all agree that paid sick leave is one of the best tools to stop the spread of COVID-19. So will the Prime Minister commit today to improving paid sick leave so it protects workers and helps us stop the spread of COVID-19?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I agree with the member opposite that paid sick leave is absolutely essential. It is essential anytime, and it is particularly important during this global pandemic. And that is why our government was very pleased to put in place, as part of the Safe Restart Agreement with the provinces and territories, 10 days of paid sick leave provided by the federal government. That sick leave is there, and I encourage all Canadian workers who need it to use it.
The Honourable Member for Portage-Lisker.
Mr. Speaker, Uyghurs in China are subject to the single largest mass surveillance program in human history, and Huawei equipment is helping in their oppression. Security experts around the world have been raising major concerns about Huawei, but despite this, the Minister of Industry has decided to sign off on a $5 million deal with Huawei anyway. He even bragged about it on Twitter. How in the world could this government think it wise in any way to hand over taxpayers' dollars to Huawei?
Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank my colleague for a question that I really appreciate. As you know, Mr. Speaker, and Canadians which are watching, our government will continue to ensure that Canadian networks are kept safe and secure. While we cannot comment on any specific companies, an examination of the 5G technologies and a review of security and economic consideration is ongoing. National security is paramount when we assess the next steps. We carefully assess these matters with allies and partners around the world, and will make the best decision in the interest of Canadians for generations to come.
The Honourable Member for Portage-Lisker.
Well, it looks like the minister is okay with turning the same blind eye to this genocide as his boss is. The genocide in China has been called the largest mass detention of human beings since the Holocaust, and Huawei appears to be right in the middle of it. When are these Liberals going to show some courage and get serious about Huawei, or at least cut them off from getting taxpayers' dollars?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I have enormous respect for my colleague, but I would take exception with the premise of her question. She will know, because she's a very well-experienced member of this House, that the Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council is responsible for the administration of the Alliance grants that she was referring to. Grants are awarded to an independent process and managed at arm's length from government. But further, she would know, last September, we published a policy statement on research security, which included instructing the federal granting councils to review their security policies so that Canadian researchers can appropriately protect their work. Mr. Speaker, that's an issue we take very seriously, and we will continue to protect the interest of Canadians.
The Honourable Member for Calgary Forest Lawn.
A troubling report revealed that Canada's visa application center in Beijing is operated by a subcontractor owned by Chinese police forces. Canadians are concerned sensitive and confidential information will fall into the hands of the Chinese Communist Party, one that is committing Uyghur genocide and detaining the two Michaels. This brings into question the integrity of our visa application process. I'm baffled. Why does this government think it is acceptable for a company with ties to the Chinese government to be running our visa offices?
Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we take the privacy and security of all applicants very seriously and ensure that we meet high standards when it comes to transparency and privacy. Protection of personal information is a primary consideration when choosing any service provider, such as a visa application center. Our officials closely monitor that these processes are followed, that Canada's stringent privacy standards are being met. We will always ensure that the privacy of all applicants remains protected.
The Honourable Member for Calgary Forest Lawn.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it's obvious to Canadians that a company with ties to the Chinese government should not be operating our visa application centers. Last night in committee, a former Hong Kong legislator, Nathan Law, who has experienced first-hand brutality of the Chinese regime, and a former Canadian diplomat to China, Charles Burton, called for an end to the contract. Given the contract's troubling connections to the Chinese government, will the minister end the contract? Yes or no?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'll reiterate that we take the protection of Canadians' privacy very seriously. Information is always handled according to Canada's privacy laws, and the data is stored on Canada temporarily and then deleted. Our officials closely monitor that these processes are followed. Canada's stringent privacy standards.
One moment, I believe we have I'll have to interrupt. I believe we have a point of order.
Point of order.
We cannot hear the minister. The interpreter cannot understand the minister. Please ask him to lower his mic.
For the arm, and maybe just about an inch above or below his mouth, and then we'll start over. Do we want to start over with the question? I think we'll start over with the honourable member for Calgary Forest Lawn.
All right. Back to Halon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's obvious to Canadians that a company with ties to the Chinese government should not be operating our visa application center. Last night in committee, a former Hong Kong legislator, Nathan Law, who has experienced first-hand brutality of the Chinese regime, and a former Canadian diplomat to China, Charles Burton, called for an end to the contract. Given the contract's troubling connections to the Chinese government, will the minister end the contract, yes or no?
Honourable Minister of Immigration.
Mr. Speaker, I will reiterate that we take the protection of Canadians' privacy very seriously. Information is always handled according to Canada's privacy laws, and the data is stored in Canada temporarily and then deleted. Our officials closely monitor that these processes are followed. We will always ensure the privacy of Canadians remains protected.
The Honourable Member for Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan.
Fred Zeppelin. Jenny,
Mr. Speaker, members of this cabinet are persistently denying the Uyghur genocide in spite of overwhelming evidence. Their proposed way of unearthing the evidence they say they require would be for the government of China to offer unfettered access to the scene of this genocide. But short of their proposed guided tour of the concentration camps, what evidence would they consider sufficient to recognize this genocide?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we have been very, very clear from the beginning that we are very seriously concerned with the allegations that have been brought forward with respect to the treatment of Uyghurs. We have demanded that the government of China allow unfettered access to a group of experts to examine the situation. But in parallel, we are also working with our international partners in order to pool our expertise and best understand all of the allegations, most of them extremely credible, that have been made against the Chinese in their treatment of the Uyghurs.
Honourable Member for Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan.
Mr. Speaker, the evidence is just so clear, and we continue to see breathtaking cowardice from this government and that minister. Yes, we understand that China is powerful, and so was Nazi Germany. But I'm only here today because Canadians were willing to stand up to a genocidal power that threatened my grandmother's life. Will the minister finally put aside his nonsense talking points, think about his own legacy and his own humanity, and finally speak the truth about this issue?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I don't very much appreciate those very personal comments made against me as a person, but I will respond by saying that this government is very seized with the issue of the treatment of Uyghurs and other minorities, and we are looking at this very carefully in concert with our international partners so that we get to the bottom of the allegations, very serious allegations that have been made against China with respect to the treatment of the Uyghurs and other minorities. And we will continue to do that with single-mindedness.
The Honourable Member for Jonquière. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In January 2020, the COVID genetic sequence was made public so that scientists around the world could start the race to find a vaccine. The government didn't take action to develop a homegrown vaccine. Health or a by $500 million levies recognition. I have
Deputy Prime Minister in his recent the Biden administration onto Indo-Pacific. President Biden is assembling a coalition of democracies to counter China's threats in Indo-Pacific. Today, the Biden administration is participating for the first time in the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, made up of Australia, India, Japan, and the United States. Some say this could evolve into an Eastern NATO. Is Canada going to be part of this, as it was with the creation of the Western Alliance, NATO? And did the Prime Minister, in his recent phone calls with Prime Minister Modi and President Biden, raise this issue?
Honourable Minister.
It's a pretty interesting question upon reflection.
Mr. Speaker, Canada has had an interest in the Indo-Pacific area for trade. For example, our participation in CPTPP. We're very interested in the ASEAN group of countries. We have a number of interests with respect to countries like India, South Korea, Japan, and others in the region in Southeast Asia. It is natural for Canada, which is a trading nation, to want to develop those, and we will be continuing to do that in the years ahead.
The Honourable Member for Timmins James Bay.
Facebook's attempt to block news media in Australia is a direct attack on every nation's sovereignty. When this government says that they stand with Australia, I say, well, God help the poor Australians. Because when Facebook was found guilty of breaking Canadian law, the Liberals did nothing. When Facebook needs staff, they just call into the Minister's department. I mean, Facebook Canada is run by a former Liberal operative, for crying out loud. Canadians deserve a government that will hold this rogue company accountable. Instead, they have one that holds their hand. So will the minister insist that Facebook pay what they owe in Canada now? That would be solidarity with the Australians.
Honourable Minister.
Solidarity with the Australians.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for his question. We've been very clear for many months. In fact, our government is at the forefront of the battle to ensure that the web giants pay their fair share. Should it be when it comes to our cultural heritage in Canada? Should it be for media or online harm? We are, just last week, Mr. Speaker, I was in conversation with France, Germany, Australia, Finland, so that we can work together to tackle these very important issues. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
L'honorable député de Rosemont.
The honourable member for Rosemont-la-Petite-Patrie.
Hey,
Mr. Speaker,
hey, Vox Guitar, what's up?
It's no secret when it comes time to support French language education, the Liberals tend to drag their heels. The official languages in education program has been frozen for years, even though student enrollment is on the rise. In Alberta, the St. Jean campus is literally under attack by the Kenney government. In Ontario, Laurentian University is fighting for its life. What's it going to take for the Liberals to wake up to the urgent need to stand up for Francophones' education rights? The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague for his question, because clearly we can always do more to protect official languages. And we see outside Quebec the need for access to French language universities and education so that the minority language communities can continue to thrive. And I would like to condemn the inaction of Conservative governments in the provinces who are neglecting this serious issue. And this directly affects the vitality of French in Canada.
The Honourable Member for Avalon.
Mr. Speaker, with the world's longest coastline and connected to 3 oceans, Canada is well positioned to be a global leader in the blue economy. An economy that creates good middle-class jobs while ensuring healthy oceans and sustainable ocean industries. Can the Minister of Fisheries and Oceans please tell this House what our government is doing to grow our blue economy?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank my colleague from Avalon for the question. Mr. Speaker, as he said, Canada is an ocean nation. We have the largest coastlines in the world, and over 300,000 Canadians are employed through our blue economy. That's why it's important that we develop a blue economy strategy that's second to none. Last week, we launched the engagement with a number of stakeholders through roundtables, including ones with industry, including fisheries and aquaculture, academia, ocean science, and women in ocean leadership. Mr. Speaker, the blue economy strategy is going to be ambitious, it's going to be prosperous and productive, as well as sustainable. It's extremely important for us to develop this strategy for our future. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Well, member for Calgary Nose Hill.
Mr. Speaker, I want to follow up on the questions asked by my colleague from Abitibi-Temiskaming. Today in Industry Committee, the Vaccine Task Force said that the deal with CanSino, which fell through for vaccines, was struck before the task force was formed. But after the task force was formed, they reviewed the deal and recommended going with it. So if the Vaccine Task Force said it was a no-go, why did the Liberals proceed?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we received the advice of the Vaccine Task Force to proceed with 7 vaccine manufacturers. That's exactly what we did. We put in place the largest, most diverse portfolio of vaccines in any country in the world. We began inoculations as one of the first countries in the world to do so, and we are continuing to ensure that Canadians have access to vaccines. Indeed, 14.5 million Canadians can expect to be vaccinated prior to the end of June, Mr. Speaker. 400,000 doses of the Pfizer vaccine have arrived in Canada and are being distributed. That's hard work, Mr. Speaker. That's progress, and we're sticking to it. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Calgary Nose Hill.
Mr. Speaker, no, that's not what I asked. The Vaccine Task Force said today that they expressly advised against proceeding with CanSino, and we know that that deal actually had a huge impact on the delays that we're seeing in vaccine delivery today. And those delays have cost Canadian lives, jobs, hopes, and more. The Vaccine Task Force, the science-delivered approach from this government, said no go with CanSino, yet this government proceeded anyways. Why were they so enamored with this Chinese company at the expense of Canadian lives?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'll tell you what we were enamored with. We were enamored with ensuring that we acted on the advice of the Vaccine Task Force in order to execute those 7 agreements in very short order. And I would like to thank all of the public servants at PSPC that worked throughout the summer and on weekends to ensure that they got that job done. And in addition, Mr. Speaker, we are well on track to have 6 million vaccines in this country prior to the end of March, another 23 million vaccines in this country prior to the end of June, and 84 million vaccines in this country prior to the end of September, so that every Canadian who wants a vaccine will indeed have access to it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Richmond, Arthabaska. Mr. Speaker, China has been holding 2 Canadians, the 2 Michaels, for over 800 days. China has blocked vaccine shipments to Canada. China's turning a blind eye to the Xinjiang genocide. China has banned Canadian pork and canola imports. China has simply no respect for human rights. Mr. Speaker, what's the Prime Minister waiting for? When will he join the Conservatives in calling for a change of venue for the Olympics? The Honourable Minister.
Back in the day, he was a Conservative.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for that question. It's a very specific question about the Olympics. We've said this repeatedly. The International Olympic Committee makes those decisions. And that continues to be our position on that. The Honourable Member for Richmond, Arthabaska. Mr. Speaker, that's pathetic, an answer like that, and a lack of leadership. Our athletes should not have to pay the price for the ignorance of Liberals and the Prime Minister. Recently, it came to light that our Canadian athletes are being briefed on what they can and cannot say in China to avoid being targeted by Chinese authorities. Mr. Speaker, this situation's critical. It's serious. How can the Prime Minister accept this? And when will he show some leadership and demand the Games be relocated? And even make that demand to the International Olympic Committee if necessary. The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As my honourable colleague knows full well, it's the International and Paralympic Olympic and Paralympic committees that make those decisions about our Canadian athletes' participation. We have full confidence that the Canadian committees will make those decisions properly in full respect of Canadian fundamental values. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member for Avignon-Lamitis-Matane-Matapédia. Mr. Speaker, this government is gutless when it comes to gun control. Not only are they doing nothing to ban handguns, they've completely abdicated responsibility by asking municipalities to act in their stead. Mr. Speaker, we can't have hundreds of different gun policies in Quebec because the federal government won't do its job. Yesterday, the National Assembly unanimously called for this government to delegate it the power to control handguns. Will the government respect this unanimous request from Quebec? The Honourable Minister.
And the member's question makes me wonder if she's even read the bill. The legislation that we've brought forward will provide Canadians with the strongest regulatory framework for the restriction of handguns in all parts of the country. And coupled with the legislation we passed with Bill C-71 and the new measures in C-21, we will have the strongest restrictions in every place, in every part of the country. There is nothing in this legislation that compels any municipality or Quebec to do more. But, Mr. Speaker, we are quite willing to work with the willing who want to do more in their communities. And we've heard from many municipalities and provinces that are prepared to do more, and every order of government has a responsibility to the safety of their citizens.
The Honourable Member for Avignon-Lamitis-Matane-Matapédia. Mr. Speaker, too cowardly to control handguns, but too vain to let Quebec do it for them. If the Liberals won't help, could they at least try to do no harm? We can't have Boisbriand, Sainte-Thérèse, and Blainville all coming up with 3 different but overlapping gun policies in the same place. Mr. Speaker, handgun murders have shot up by 40% in 10 years. If the government is unwilling to do its job, would they at least let Quebec do it for them? The Honourable Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And the members, unparliamentary and rude language notwithstanding, let me be very clear that the legislation that we have brought forward will provide all Canadians in every place, including in the province of Quebec, with the strongest regulatory framework that prevents the handguns getting into the hands of criminals by strengthening our response at the border, by preventing the theft and criminal diversion of handguns into criminals' hands, and by taking steps to remove dangerous firearms from dangerous situations. Mr. Speaker, we've also prepared to support the provinces, and we have given the province of Quebec tens of millions of dollars to assist the police, and we look forward to them finally distributing that to municipal police services to help them do the important work of keeping their communities safe.
The Honourable Member for Lambton, Kent, Middlesex.
Mr. Speaker, for months I have asked this government for certainty on getting international farm workers to Canadian farms. These workers are vital to Canadian fruit and vegetable producers. With commercial flights being cancelled from Mexico and the Caribbean, where the vast majority of workers come from, many farmers across the country are left wondering exactly how and when they will get their workers. Will the minister tell farmers the plan for getting workers to farms after mid-March, when the largest number of farm workers are set to arrive?
The Honourable Minister. The Honourable Minister.
Sorry, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our government recognizes the integral role farm workers and farmers play in ensuring Canadians have access to food, and we're here to support them. We're working very hard to ensure the continued safety and timely arrival of temporary foreign workers into Canada. In the case of temporary foreign workers in ag and seafood sectors, our government is deferring the requirement that they quarantine in a government-approved hotel until March 14th to allow for the development of tailored solutions. In the interim, temporary foreign workers entering Canada will go to the usual place of quarantine provided by their employer under existing quarantine rules. We value and are so appreciative of the work of these workers, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Beauce. Mr. Speaker, in Beauce, foreign workers are not a choice, they're a necessity. Companies like Acier d'Armature in Saint-Benoît-l'Arbre are getting tied up in red tape, and now, especially, endless delays. Businesses of this kind need foreign workers to remain operational.
The problem? The FAST Support Service Office is closed due to the pandemic. What does this mean for renewals?
Windsor-Essex is the busiest border crossing in North America. Failures in processing fast card means jobs lost and delays at the border. What specifically is being done to fix the problem? Thank you, Speaker.
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, international bridges and border crossing are critical economic links between Canada and the United States, and we support essential supply chains, and those borders support essential supply chains for many different industries. We are aware of the impact that COVID-19 pandemic and related travel restrictions have had on those border crossing. We're closely monitoring the situation to ensure that these border crossing and bridges continue to operate safely for individuals and supply chain. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Sydney Victoria.
Mr. Speaker, the evidence is clear. Indigenous and racialized Canadians are overrepresented in the justice system. Indigenous people accounted for just 5% of the Canadian adult population, but 30% of the federally incarcerated inmates. This is shameful. However, the Minister of Justice has recently tabled a critical piece of legislation which includes reforms that will help address the overrepresentation of Indigenous people in the justice system. Can the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Justice update the House?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, I want to first thank the member from Sydney Victoria for his tireless advocacy in the fight against systemic racism. We are finally turning the page on failed conservative criminal justice policies that have not made us safe and not deterred criminals. Instead, they've resulted in the over-incarceration of Indigenous people, Black people, and marginalized Canadians. The package that has been tabled is a necessary reset for our criminal law. It proposes to repeal certain mandatory minimum penalties, restore greater availability of conditional sentence orders, and provide police and prosecutors the tools and guidance to treat addiction as a health issue. Bill C-22 represents an important step forward in the fight against systemic racism. We hope that members across the aisle support this bill that will truly keep all communities in Canada safe. Thank you.
Honourable Member for Sarnia-Lambton.
Mr. Speaker, it's been 2 weeks since I asked the Prime Minister to take action on the Line 5 issue. This requires a leader-to-leader interaction. When will the Prime Minister personally pick up the phone, call President Biden, and ask him to intervene to keep Line 5 open?
Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as I've said, we take this issue very seriously. Line 5 is vital to our energy security, vital to our economy, provides thousands of jobs at refineries in Sarnia, in Montreal, at Lévis, Quebec. It supplies 53% of Ontario's crude oil supply, 66% of Quebec's. It supplies Michigan with 55% of their statewide propane. So I assure this House, we are looking at all our options. Line 5 is a vital pipeline for Canada's energy security. We support it. We will defend it.
What's up?
The Honourable Member for Calgary Confederation.
Mr. Speaker, this Liberal government has presided over thousands of job losses in Alberta's energy sector. At the same time, our energy workers watch foreign oil come into this country from third world dictators and human rights abusers. Clearly, this Liberal government is willing to support jobs in Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Russia, Nigeria, and others, instead of supporting jobs here in Canada. What specific action will this Liberal government take this year to reduce foreign oil imports into Canada?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Happy to remind the honourable member that we approved of TMX. We're building it. That's 7,000 jobs that we've created. The Line 3 pipeline, we approved it. That's another 7,000 jobs. NGTL 2021, we've approved it. There are thousands of jobs created there. LNG Canada, we're building it. Thousands of jobs there. And orphan and inactive wells, $1.7 billion we've put towards that. Thousands of jobs to be created. And of course, the wage subsidy, where more than 500,000 workers were kept in their jobs in a pandemic in Alberta alone. That is our record, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Battle River Crowfoot.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Over the last 3 weeks, there's been a growing bipartisan consensus the Keystone XL pipeline cancellation was a mistake. Now, high-profile Democrat and Republican leaders are calling for the project to be continued, and more than a dozen states are pondering legal action against the Biden administration. The Liberals say they support the chance. Now is their chance to actually do it and stand up for KXL. Will the government finally do so?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we're not happy with the decision to cancel Keystone XL's permit, but I'll quote Chris Bloomer, the CEO of the Canadian Energy Pipeline Association. He said Keystone XL is a loss, but is it the end of Canada's oil and gas industry? Absolutely not. Canada is a world leader in responsible energy development. We have abundant natural resources that can help meet the growing demand for affordable energy around the world and can offset global emissions, end quote. Mr. Speaker, we agree the world needs more Canadian energy, and we support our energy workers. Thank you.
The honourable member for Châteauguay-Lacolle. Mr. Speaker, Parc Safari is one of the main tourist attractions in Montérégie, attracting hundreds of thousands of visitors every year. Like many tourism operators, they've been hit hard by COVID-19 and have had to adapt to survive. A few weeks ago, I was pleased to announce that we are allocating close to $1 million to Parc Safari, which will help it cover new costs and continue to welcome families and protect the jobs of the many people who work there. Could the Minister of Economic Development tell the House how this government is delivering for tourism businesses in my riding and all across Canada? The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank the member for Châteauguay-Lacolle for her question and her outstanding work. Parc Safari is a major tourism attraction. We know that tourism has faced major challenges in this pandemic, and we've been there since the beginning to help. In Quebec alone, we've supported around 1,000 tourism companies with over $44 million invested in individual companies. And all across Canada, it's $350 million distributed to over 3,500 tourism organizations. The honourable member for Vancouver East.
Canadians are struggling with significant income loss due to the pandemic. Even with the CERB or CRB, many are unable to afford rent. The dead load in rent arrears is staggering, and provinces lift their temporary eviction ban. Many Canadians are at risk of losing their home. This is especially acute in large cities and has disproportionately affected women, people of color, and people with disabilities. The National Housing Strategy access adequate housing is a basic human right. Will the Prime Minister put in place national eviction standards and a federal retroactive residential tenant support benefit so that no one will end up on the street because they can't afford rent?
Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, our government's priority is to make sure that Canadians can keep food on their tables and a roof over their heads. That's why we took quick action by creating the Canada Emergency Response Benefit and the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy to ensure Canadians have the support they need to stay in their homes during the COVID-19 pandemic. We've moved Canadians from the CRB into employment insurance with no increase in EI premiums. In addition, we're concluding agreements with provinces and territories for the Canada Housing Benefit, a game changer to enable people to receive direct payments to enable them to pay rent.
The honourable member for Vancouver Grenville.
Disturbingly, Vancouver stats show anti-Asian hate crimes are up 717%. At the same time, China's national security law is of grave concern to Canadians with ties to Hong Kong. The two Michaels continue to be arbitrarily detained. As for the Uyghurs, why is it genocide for my peoples but not for the Uyghurs? Move or boycott the Beijing Olympics? Well, the government has abdicated that decision in favor of an Olympic committee. Mr. Speaker, will the government please stand up for justice and human rights and demonstrate it has the backs of Chinese Canadians, indeed for all Canadians?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I thank my colleague for the question, and as we have stated repeatedly, we are gravely concerned with the allegations coming out of Xinjiang with respect to the treatment of Uyghurs and other Turkic Muslim minorities. We have urged the Chinese government to allow a group of experts, international and impartial, to examine the situation. And at the same time, we are working with our international partners and putting together our expertise with respect to the allegations, the serious allegations that have come out of China.
All right, well, so that's going to wrap that up. now what we're going to try to do, again, I think I've got my buddy Kirk here, who's been helping me out a lot with the channel and just been a good friend and helper. We're going to try to do this. So, which one do we need, Kirk? Are we working? I think that I can maybe also hear you just fine. Can you can't hear me, or you can? I can hear you now. All right. So I think that we have some audio coming in. Like, this is something that we're going to be trying to do, guys, and maybe we're screwing this up right now. I'm not sure. What did you think of the show, Kirk? How was your afternoon? No, I can hear you too, but track, it doesn't seem. And again, we're just going to need to practice more at this part. No, it was a lot of fun. It's a blast. There's so many and new faces that get along with the old faces. Pretty much perfect, like in my world. And anyways, we're probably going to just wrap it up instead of trying to figure out this audio stuff. I'll give you a shout in a couple of minutes. Maybe we'll work on it then. And to the rest of the gang, like, thank you for coming and checking it out. The first half of that show I really did find exciting for even myself. It was different than other things that we've tried before. And it worked. Like, it seemed to. Anyways, guys, I'm Ehren. This is Question Period Canada. We hang out every day watching and learning about Canadian federal politics. It's a thing to do these days, like, because these guys got ahead of us. And how are we going to get out of the hole that they're digging? Wait and see. We need an election. We'll figure that out soon. I don't know if Jagmeet's on the fence or dangling a carrot or teasing it. It's hard to tell. Anyways, we're going to wrap it all up. Thank you all so much for watching. Have something healthy to eat today. It's getting a lot easier to stay warm in the province where I live, and it's not one of the warmer provinces, so that should get better for all of us. Until the next video, which is going to be tomorrow, take care. We'll catch y'all next video. Thank y'all. Take care. We are